William Olaf Stapledon, known as Olaf Stapledon, was a British philosopher and author of influential works of science fiction. In 2014, he was inducted into the Science Fiction and Fantasy Hall of Fame. Life. Stapledon was born in Seacombe, Wallasey, on the Wirral Peninsula in Cheshire, the only son of William Clibbett Stapledon and Emmeline Miller. The first 6 years of his life were spent with his parents at Port Said, Egypt. He was educated at Abbott's Home School and Balliol College, Oxford, where he acquired a BA degree in modern history in 1909, promoted to an MA degree in 1913. After a brief stint as a teacher at Manchester Grammar School, he worked in shipping offices in Liverpool and Port Said from 1910 to 1912. From 1912 to 1915, Stapledon worked with the Liverpool branch of the Workers' Educational Association. During the First World War, he served as a conscientious objector. Stapledon became an ambulance driver with the Friends Ambulance Unit in France and Belgium from July 1915 to January 1919. He was awarded the Croix de Guerre for bravery. On 16 July 1919, he married Agnes Sina Miller, an Australian cousin. They had first met in 1903, and later maintained a correspondence throughout the war. They had a daughter, Mary Sydney Stapledon, and a son, John David Stapledon. In 1920 they moved to West Kirby. Stapledon was awarded a PhD degree in philosophy from the University of Liverpool in 1925 and used his doctoral thesis as the basis for his first published prose book, A Modern Theory of Ethics. However, he soon turned to fiction in the hope of presenting his ideas to a wider public. The relative success of Last and First Men prompted him to become a full-time writer. He wrote a sequel, Last Men in London, and followed it up with many more books of both fiction and philosophy. For the duration of the Second World War, Stapledon abandoned his pacifism and supported the war effort. In 1940, the Stapledon family built and moved into a new house on Simon's Field, in Caldy, on the Wirral. During the war, Stapledon became a public advocate of J.B. Priestley and Richard Acland's left-wing Commonwealth Party, as well as the British internationalist group Federal Union. After 1945, Stapledon travelled widely on lecture tours, visiting the Netherlands, Sweden and France, and in 1948 he spoke at the World Congress of Intellectuals for Peace in Wrocław, Poland. He attended the Conference for World Peace held in New York City in 1949, the only Briton to be granted a visa to do so. In 1950 he became involved with the anti-apartheid movement. After a week of lectures in Paris, he cancelled a projected trip to Yugoslavia and returned to his home in Caldy, where he died very suddenly of a heart attack. On Stapledon's religious views, he was an agnostic. Stapledon was cremated at Landican Crematorium. His widow and the children scattered his ashes on the sandy cliffs overlooking the Dee estuary, a favourite spot of his that features in more than one of his books. Stapledon Wood, on the southeast side of Caldy Hill, is named after him. Works. Stapledon's fiction often presents the strivings of some intelligence that is beaten down by an indifferent universe and its inhabitants who, through no fault of their own, fail to comprehend its lofty yearnings. It is filled with protagonists who are tormented by the conflict between their higher and lower impulses. Stapledon's writings directly influenced Arthur C. Clarke, Brian Aldiss, Stanislaw Lem, Bertrand Russell, John Glowig, Naomi Michelson, C.S. Lewis, Werner Vinge, John Maynard Smith, and indirectly influenced many others, contributing many ideas to the world of science fiction. The supermind, composed of many individual consciousnesses, forms a recurring theme in his work. Star Maker contains the first known description of what are now called Dyson spheres. Freeman Dyson credits the novel novel with giving him the idea, even stating in an interview that Stapledon's sphere would be a more appropriate name. Last and First Men features early descriptions of genetic engineering and terraforming. Sirius describes a dog whose intelligence is increased to the level of a human being's. Some commentators have called Stapledon a Marxist, although Stapledon himself explicitly rejected Marxism. Stapledon's work also refers to then contemporary intellectual fashions. Last and First Men, a future history of 18 successive species of humanity, and Starmaker, an outline history of the universe, were highly acclaimed by figures as diverse as George Louis Borges, J.B. Priestley, Bertrand Russell, Algernon Blackwood, Hugh Walpole, Arnold Bennett, Virginia Woolf and Winston Churchill. In contrast, Stapledon's philosophy repelled C.S. Lewis, whose Cosmic Trilogy was written partly in response to what Lewis saw as amorality. Although Lewis admired Stapledon's inventiveness and described him as a corking good writer, in fact Stapledon was an agnostic who was hostile to religious institutions, but not to religious yearnings, a fact that set him at odds with H.G. Wells in their correspondence. None of Stapledon's novels or short stories has been adapted for film or television, although George Pal bought the rights to Odd John. Castle of Frankenstein magazine reported in 1966 that David McCallum would play the title role, together with his philosophy lectureship at the University of Liverpool, which now houses the Olaf Stapledon Archive. Stapledon lectured in English literature, industrial history and psychology. He wrote many non-fiction books on political and ethical subjects, in which he advocated the growth of spiritual values, which he defined as those values expressive of a yearning for greater awareness of the self in a larger context. Stapledon himself named his spiritual values as intelligence, love and creative action. In Nations with Life Plus 70 Years Copyright Regimes, Stapledon's published works will be in the public domain from 2021. Bibliography. Fiction. Last and First Men, a story of the near and far future. Last Men in London, Odd John, a story between jest and earnest. Starmaker, Darkness and the Light. Old Man in New World. Sirius, a fantasy of love and discord. Death into Life, The Flames, a fantasy. A Man Divided. Four Encounters. Nebula Maker, non-fiction. A Modern Theory of Ethics, a study of the relations of ethics and psychology. Waking World, Saints and Revolutionaries, New Hope for Britain, Philosophy and Living, 2 volumes. Beyond the ISMs, 7 Pillars of Peace, Youth and Tomorrow, The Opening of the Eyes. Poetry. Latter-day Psalms, Collections. Worlds of Wonder, 3 Tales of Fantasy. To the End of Time, the best of Olaf Stapledon. Far Future Calling, Uncollected Science Fiction and Fantasies of Olaf Stapledon. An Olaf Stapledon Reader.